Have you ever caught yourself in one of those strange little moments? You walk into the kitchen, open the pantry door, and suddenly realize you have no idea why you went there in the first place. Or maybe this feels familiar. You search all over the house for your reading glasses, getting more irritated by the second, only to find them already sitting on top of your head. Or you're talking to your granddaughter, you want to say her name, and for one quiet second, your mind goes blank. That tiny second of silence inside the brain scares many people more than high blood pressure, insomnia, or aching knees. Because memory is not just a brain function. Memory is stability. It is the feeling that you still have a grip on your life, that you are still in control. And in that moment, most people think the same thing. Well, I guess this is just age. But I want to tell you something that surprises a lot of people. In many cases, the problem is not age. That may sound strange, even paradoxical, but very often the reason the brain begins to slow down has less to do with the number on your driver's license and much more to do with one habit you repeat almost every evening. And the worst part? That habit looks completely harmless. In fact, many people think of it as a light dinner. Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel and like this video if you want simple, honest health information explained in plain English. On this channel, we talk about the small daily habits that quietly shape your brain, heart, and body after 50. Doctors do not always talk much about this because it is more common to talk about pills, supplements, memory formulas, expensive nootropics, and brain boosters. But the truth is, many of those things only address the symptom. They try to push the brain to perform faster, while the real cause is still sitting there every single evening, slowly clouding your mind. And this is what matters most. After 50, the brain does not suddenly become weak. No, it becomes more sensitive to the way you live, especially in the evening. Because the evening is when your brain decides what kind of night it is going to have. Will it spend the night cleaning itself, repairing connections between nerve cells, organizing memories, and restoring energy? Or will it spend the night dealing with heavy food, blood sugar spikes, silent inflammation, and poor sleep? Over many years of practice, I have seen the same pattern again and again. A patient comes in and says, "Doctor, my memory just isn't what it used to be. I guess I'm getting older." Then we calmly walk through the day, and the picture becomes very interesting. The morning is manageable, the afternoon is okay, but in the evening, a completely different story begins. Tea with cookies, sweetened yogurt, white toast, crackers, instant oatmeal, a baked potato with processed meat, sometimes a bowl of fruit right before bed, then television until midnight, and the next morning, heavy head, mental fog, poor concentration, that strange feeling that the brain is still half asleep. And once again, the person says, "It must be age." But often that is not what is happening at all. The brain simply did not get the conditions it needed to do its night shift properly. Because here is the scientific fact that almost nobody talks about in everyday life. Memory does not live separately from the rest of the body. It depends on blood flow. It depends on blood sugar stability. It depends on deep sleep. It depends on inflammation. It depends on whether the brain gets a calm, clean, steady internal environment at night. And this is where the real key is hidden. Some very ordinary foods that people eat in the evening can trigger a process in the brain that is easy to describe in simple words. The brain begins to move through fog, not in one day, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, week after week, month after month. And then one day a person notices that names take longer to remember, thoughts feel slower, focus slips away faster, and sometimes the brain just freezes for a second. That is why this matters so much, because in many cases, this is not a sentence from age. It is the result of a few evening habits that quietly steal mental clarity. Today I want to show you some of those silent memory thieves, the foods and habits most people never suspect. And at the end, I will also tell you about one very simple evening food that may help support the brain at night in a completely different way. When people add it to dinner, many of them come back a week or two later and say almost the same thing. "Doctor, it feels like the fog has lifted a little." And no, that is not magic. That is biochemistry. So let's talk calmly and clearly about what really happens inside your brain in the evening. Because the truth is, memory rarely falls apart all at once. It fades slowly, quietly, almost invisibly, and most of the time it does not begin with disease. It begins with ordinary evening choices that look completely normal. I call them the silent evening thieves of memory. And here is the first one: a sweet evening snack. The pattern looks very innocent. You finish dinner, and then you want just a little something: a few cookies, a muffin, a sweet yogurt, a granola bar, a bowl of cereal, maybe even what looks like a healthy option: flavored oatmeal or low-fat fruit yogurt. It feels light, harmless, comforting. But let's look at what actually happens inside the body. Imagine your brain as a high-end laboratory that works all night long. For that lab to function properly, it needs stable energy. Not fireworks, not a sugar blast, not chaos. Just a calm, even flow of fuel. Now look at what sugar does. Sugar enters the bloodstream and blood glucose rises quickly. The pancreas reacts like an emergency response team, releasing insulin to pull that sugar back out of the blood. And here is the part most people never feel clearly. The blood sugar often drops too fast. Now the brain receives a stress signal. Instead of preparing for restoration, it starts fighting to maintain energy balance. That is why so many people feel a strange pattern at night. They ate, but an hour later they want something sweet again. They feel slightly irritable. Their head feels off. They feel restless but tired at the same time. It sounds minor, but if this happens every evening, the brain never gets a calm night for repair. And right behind that comes the second silent enemy: refined carbs at dinner, white toast, crackers, bagels, instant mashed potatoes, sugary cereal, fast oatmeal packets, pancakes at night, even certain healthy snack bars. People often say, well, it's not candy, it's regular food. But in terms of biochemistry, many refined carbohydrates behave almost like sugar. Imagine insulin as a vacuum cleaner that removes glucose from the bloodstream. When you eat something highly refined, that vacuum has to work at full power. If that happens night after night, cells can gradually become less responsive to insulin. Then sugar stays in the blood longer. And now here is the important part. The blood vessels in the brain are extremely delicate. You can think of them as microscopic tubes feeding every nerve cell. When blood sugar keeps swinging up and down, those tiny vessels begin to lose flexibility. Like old garden hoses that have become stiff, blood flow becomes less efficient. And the brain depends on good blood flow more than almost any other organ. Even a mild drop in microcirculation can show up as slower thinking, poor concentration, mental fatigue, and those frustrating moments when a word sits on the tip of your tongue but just will not come out. I remember one patient very clearly. His name was Michael. He was 64 years old, a retired electrical engineer, sharp his whole life, the kind of man who could explain complex systems in 2 sentences. He came in deeply worried. He said, "Doctor, something feels wrong. I'm forgetting technical terms I've used for decades." For him, that was terrifying. So we walked through his routine. And do you know what we found? Every evening he had the exact same ritual: black tea, 2 slices of white toast with processed deli meat, and a few vanilla cookies. He had been doing it for nearly 20 years. We did not change his medications. We did not put him on some expensive memory stack. We did not start with fancy supplements. We simply removed the fast carbs from his evenings. 3 weeks later, he came back and said something I hear very often. "It feels like my head is lighter." Not perfect. Not like he was 30 again. But noticeably clearer. And now we come to the third silent enemy. People rarely suspect. Fruit late at night. This surprises a lot of people because fruit is healthy. And yes, during the day, fruit can absolutely be part of a healthy diet. But in the evening, there is an important nuance. Most fruit contains fructose. And when fructose enters the body close to bedtime, the liver has to go back to work. Instead of supporting nighttime recovery, the liver is suddenly busy processing sugar. That may affect insulin, disrupt metabolic calm, and make deep sleep harder to reach. And this leads to one of the most important scientific facts in the entire conversation. The deepest stages of sleep are when the brain runs its cleaning system. This system is often called the glymphatic system. In simple language, it is the brain's nighttime drainage and cleanup process. Microscopic spaces between brain cells open up. Fluid moves through those spaces and helps wash away waste products that build up during the day. But that cleanup works best during deep sleep. If the body spends the night digesting sugar-heavy food, dealing with insulin swings, and staying metabolically active, that cleanup system works less efficiently. And that is why so many people wake up with a very familiar feeling. I slept, but my head still feels heavy. The thoughts are slow, the brain feels thick. It takes hours to feel mentally awake. Now here is the good news. In many cases, this can improve surprisingly quickly. Because the brain responds fast when you finally give it the right conditions. Remove a few evening mistakes, and it often begins to work differently. But that is only part of the picture. Because there are more silent evening enemies, and one of them is so common, it is sitting in almost every American refrigerator. And very often, it is one of the biggest reasons people wake up with brain fog. That is what we need to talk about next. Because the real problem is usually not one food. It is a chain of habits, a pattern, a series of ordinary choices that all push the brain in the wrong direction at the same time. And here is the fourth factor: processed fats at dinner. The symptom looks completely ordinary. Sausage, hot dogs, bacon-heavy meals, frozen dinners, fast food fries, store-bought creamy sauces, fried potatoes, processed cheese combinations, microwave comfort food. The person thinks it's just dinner. But for the brain, that dinner can create a very different internal environment. Imagine nerve cells as tiny power stations constantly sending electrical messages to each other. For those signals to move quickly, the outer membrane of each cell needs to stay flexible. Now imagine an electrical cable that has dried out and become stiff. The signal no longer moves as cleanly. That is very similar to what can happen when the diet is overloaded with processed fats. Cell membranes become less fluid. Communication between neurons becomes less efficient. And memory, in many ways, is simply a network of fast, clean signals between brain cells. The faster those signals move, the easier it is to remember words, process information, and stay focused. When those membranes become more rigid, the whole system slows down. The thought takes longer to form. Focus slips faster. The head feels thick. The brain feels tired. And this is especially important because the human brain is made largely of fat, which means the kinds of fats you eat help shape the very structure of the brain. Some fats make things harder. Some fats help the brain work beautifully. And that leads us to the fifth factor: not enough omega-3 fats. Many people over 50 in the US eat very little fatty fish, and yet omega-3 fats act like lubrication for the brain. Think of a machine with moving gears. Without proper lubrication, the gears grind and wear down. Omega-3 fats help keep cell membranes flexible, support blood flow, and calm inflammation. That matters because the brain's blood vessels are tiny, incredibly delicate structures. Red blood cells often move through them almost one by one. If those vessels lose flexibility, oxygen delivery suffers, and the brain consumes an enormous share of the body's energy. Even a small drop in blood flow can show up as fatigue, poor concentration, slower recall, and that strange sensation that your memory is still there. But it takes longer to reach. I remember a woman named Linda. She was 68, a former school librarian, and she said something very precise. I still remember things. It just takes longer. That is one of the most accurate descriptions of what happens when the brain is undernourished. We reviewed her meals. Very little fish, a lot of processed meat, a lot of fried foods. We made one simple change. 2 or 3 times a week, she started eating fatty fish common in the US: salmon, sardines, trout, or mackerel. A month later, she said, "It's like my thoughts move faster now. Not overnight, not magically, but noticeably." And there is one more evening habit people almost never connect with memory: late sweet drinks, herbal tea with honey, sweet chai, hot chocolate, decaf coffee with sugar and creamer, tea with cookies, a small dessert after dinner. It seems tiny, but in the evening the body is supposed to be moving toward calm. Melatonin is supposed to rise. The nervous system is supposed to slow down. The brain is supposed to prepare for deep sleep. But when sugar enters the bloodstream at that hour, the body gets a different message: stay active, keep processing, do not settle yet, and shallow sleep follows. Now remember this: Memory is strengthened during deep sleep. That is when the hippocampus, one of the brain's most important memory centers, helps move information from short-term storage into longer-term memory. You can think of it like this. During the day, information piles up on the desk. At night, the brain files it into the archive. But if sleep stays shallow, that filing process is weaker. Then the person says, "I read it, but I don't remember it. They told me, but I forgot. I know the word, but I can't pull it out." And again, that is not always brain aging. Very often, it is poor nighttime memory processing. That is why I always tell people not to panic first. First, look at the evening, because the evening often tells the real story.